The rain had a memory. It was not in the water itself, but in the scent that preceded it, that sharp, electric perfume of ozone and damp stone that clung to the air moments before the sky broke open. Elian felt it on his tongue, a metallic tang that coiled in the base of his throat. He paused on the sterile concourse, his hand hovering over the scanner that would grant him entry to his residential block, and tilted his head back. Above, the permacrete ceiling glowed with a soft, simulated daylight, but he could feel the pressure change, the atmospheric shift that was the city's only true season. It was a phantom sense, a ghost of a world that existed before the domes, but it was real to him. It was the scent of that night. He pressed his palm to the scanner. The light shifted from red to green with a sterile chime, and the mag-sealed door hissed open. His apartment was a precise cube of regulated air and muted colors, a space designed for somatic tranquility, as the brochures claimed. For Elian, it was a fortress built of forgetting. He moved through the space with the economy of a man who has measured every step 1,000 times. He shed his uniform, a simple grey tunic and trousers that marked him as a Tier 3 archivist, and let it fall into the reclamation chute. The fabric was synthetic, textureless, designed to leave no impression on the skin. It was the opposite of the fine, dark wool of the coat he remembered, a material that had been impossibly soft and heavy against his cheek. He had been told to forget. The words had been a command, low and serrated, with a pain that had frightened him more than the authority in the Alpha's voice. Forget this. Forget me. A simple, brutal excision. Elian had tried. He had scrubbed his skin until it was raw, purged his apartment of any scent that was not the recycled, sterile air of the system, and submerged himself in the endless, silent data streams of the archive. He catalogued history that had been sanitized into numbers, lives reduced to demographic shifts, passions to biochemical markers. It was a litany of forgetting, a job that suited his purpose perfectly. He was not a person. He was a function. He was not an Omega who had spent one unsanctioned, impossible night with an Alpha far above his station. He was Archivist 7 Delta. That was all. He stood under the fine mist of the sonic cleanser, letting the vibrations dislodge the grime of the city and the residue of memory. The water was a constant, calibrated temperature, but a chill spread from the center of his chest, a cold that had nothing to do with the water. It was the echo of a touch, a hand splayed across his back, anchoring him, branding him. He shut his eyes, but the image remained, seared onto the back of his eyelids, a face shadowed by dim light, eyes the color of storm clouds, a scent of rain and scorched cedar that had overwhelmed his senses. Kale. That was the name he was supposed to forget, a name that felt like a shard of glass under his tongue. When he emerged, wrapped in a simple cotton robe, the apartment's soft lighting had dimmed to its evening cycle. He prepared his nutrient paste, a tasteless beige substance that provided perfect caloric balance and zero pleasure. He ate, standing at the counter, looking out the reinforced plasteel window at the cityscape. Towers of chrome and light pierced the perpetual twilight of the dome, connected by shimmering sky bridges traversed by silent, gliding vehicles. It was a world of perfect order, of designated paths and predictable outcomes, a world where an Omega archivist and a high-ranking Alpha could never intersect. Their meeting had been a glitch in the system, a catastrophic error, and Kale had ordered him to delete the file. He was rinsing the nutrient tube when the proximity alert chimed. a soft, two-tone pulse. It was unexpected. He received no visitors. His social interactions were limited to the clipped, professional exchanges at the archive. He moved to the door, his bare feet silent on the polished floor. The security panel showed a visual feed of the corridor outside. A man stood there, perfectly still, his back to the camera. He was tall, dressed in a dark, exquisitely tailored coat that seemed to absorb the light. The cut was military, precise, but the fabric was rich, a luxury far beyond this residential tier. Elian's heart began a frantic, painful rhythm against his ribs. It was the same kind of coat. He told himself it was a coincidence, a trick of the light, of memory. But then the man turned, not to face the camera, but to look down the corridor as if expecting someone. The angle revealed his profile, a sharp jaw, a strong, straight nose. He was not Kale. The realization brought a confusing mixture of relief and a deeper, colder dread. This man was older, his features harder, more severe. Yet there was a resemblance, a terrifying, unmistakable echo in the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. He was an alpha. The sheer pressure of his presence could be felt even through the reinforced door, a static charge in the air. The man then turned his head slightly, his gaze lifting as if he knew, somehow, that Elian was watching. He looked directly at the camera lens, and Elian felt the look like a physical touch, a pinprick of ice on his skin. His eyes were not the stormy grey of Kyle's. They were a pale, glacial blue, devoid of warmth, filled with an unnerving, analytical intelligence. The man did not knock. He did not speak. He simply stood there for 10, 20, 30 seconds, a silent, imposing statue in the empty corridor. Then, as slowly as he had turned, he faced away again and walked down the hall, his footsteps making no sound. He disappeared around the corner. The corridor was empty. The proximity alert ceased. Elian stood frozen, his hand pressed to the cold metal of the door. The nutrient tube slipped from his other hand and clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, profound silence. He did not move to pick it up. He was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable tremor that started in his hands and spread through his entire body. It was not a coincidence. He knew it with a certainty that defied all logic. That man was connected to Kale. He was connected to that night, and he knew where Elian lived. The fortress of forgetting had been breached. The ghost was no longer just a memory. It had a face, and it had found him. The command had been to forget, but this silent, watching alpha was a reminder, a threat, a question, and Elian had no answers. He sank to the floor, his back against the door, and wrapped his arms around himself. The air in his perfectly regulated apartment suddenly felt thin, suffocating. The scent of rain was back, stronger than ever, and this time it felt like a promise of drowning. The night stretched before him, a vast, silent expanse, and for the first time in months he was afraid not of the memory, but of what was to come. The tremor did not subside. It settled deep in his bones, a low-frequency hum of anxiety that disrupted the careful, sterile rhythm of his existence. Sleep offered no escape, only fractured replays of a glacial blue gaze and the silent, imposing figure in the corridor. He woke before the simulated dawn, the sheets damp beneath him, the scent of his own distress, a faint, sour note of frightened Omega, polluting the filtered air of his apartment. He immediately cycled the purification system to its highest setting, scrubbing the evidence of his fear from the atmosphere. Control. Control was survival. He repeated the mantra as he dressed, as he consumed his morning nutrient paste, as he prepared for his shift at the Central Archive. Control was the wall he had built around the memory of Kale, and he would not let this new, silent threat dismantle it, brick by brick. The journey to the archive was a study in systemic order. He rode the public transit maglev, a silent capsule that slid through subterranean tunnels, its interior filled with the city's Tier 3 and Tier 4 workers. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. They were components in a vast machine, moving from their designated living sector to their designated work sector. Elian found a grim comfort in the anonymity, in the sheer, overwhelming predictability of it all. He was just one of millions, invisible, safe. The illusion shattered the moment he stepped onto the grand plaza of the Ministry of Records. The man was there. He stood near the base of a colossal statue depicting the founder, a stern-faced alpha in a stylized military uniform. He was dressed as he had been the night before, in the same dark, severe coat, a stark figure against the white marble of the plaza. He was not looking at Elian. His attention seemed to be on the flow of people entering the ministry, a calm, dispassionate observer. But his presence was a focused beam of energy, and Elian felt it land on him like a weight. His breath hitched. His steps faltered. He forced himself to keep moving, to merge with the stream of other archivists, to become just another grey uniform in the crowd. He can't know it's me. He can't. But the argument felt hollow, even in his own mind. The man's appearance at his residential block, and now here, at his place of work, it was a pattern too deliberate to be chance. He risked a glance over his shoulder as he passed through the ministry's immense, echoing entrance hall. The man had not moved. He was still watching the entrance, his pale eyes sweeping over the crowd. For a terrifying second, Elian thought their gazes met, a spark of connection across the vast, impersonal space. He quickly turned away, his heart hammering against his ribs. He did not look back again. The archive was his sanctuary, a cold, silent catacomb of data. The air was chilled to preserve the delicate crystalline storage units, and the only sound was the faint hum of the climate control systems. Here, surrounded by the neatly categorized ghosts of the past, Elian could usually find a measure of peace. Today, the silence felt different. It felt charged, watchful. He slid into his workstation, a recessed cubicle that faced a wall of shimmering data crystals. His assignment for the cycle was the sanitization of pre-unification records, a tedious task of redacting emotive or subversive language from historical documents before they were transferred to the public access servers. He was erasing words like love, rebellion, freedom, replacing them with clinical-approved terminology, biochemical pair bonding, systemic non-compliance, optimized social mobility. It was the work of a ghost, erasing the passions of other ghosts. He tried to lose himself in the task, in the rhythmic tap of his fingers on the light-sensitive console. But the image of the silent alpha was superimposed over the glowing text. A quiet dread began to unfurl in his gut. Kyle's words echoed in his mind, no longer a simple command, but a desperate, urgent plea. Forget this. Forget me. For your own safety, you must. At the time, in the haze of shock and pheromonal overload, Elian had interpreted it as rejection, a cruel dismissal after a moment of impossible, terrifying intimacy. Now he wondered if it had been a warning. He pulled up a restricted historical file, one he had accessed that night with Kyle. It was a file on pre-unification art, full of forbidden poetry and imagery. Kyle had been looking for something specific, and he had needed Elian's clearance level and intuitive grasp of the chaotic pre-system archives to find it. They had been in a private, soundproofed data room deep in the archive's sub-levels. The air had been thick with the scent of old paper and decaying data mediums, a forbidden perfume in their sterile world. And it had been thick with Kyle's scent, scorched cedar and rain, a scent that had made Elian's Omega instincts, long dormant under layers of suppressants and rigid self-control, stir and awaken with a violent, undeniable pull. He remembered the low rumble of Kyle's voice as he read a line of redacted poetry, the way his eyes, the color of a gathering storm, had lifted from the screen to meet Elian's. In that moment, the chasm of their social tiers had vanished. They were just an alpha and an omega, drawn together by a force older and more powerful than the system that governed their lives. The memory was so vivid it made his hands shake. He had to stop. He had to get it under control. He closed the file and leaned back, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes. He focused on his breathing, a meditative technique taught to all Omegas to regulate their emotional responses. Inhale order, exhale chaos, inhale compliance, exhale desire. But the memory of Kale's touch, the rough scrape of his stubble against Elian's cheek, the desperate, almost reverent way he had held him, refused to be exhaled. It was a part of him now, a phantom limb that ached with a constant, secret pain. And now this other alpha, this cold, silent reflection of Kale, was here to remind him of it. Was he a threat, a guardian? Was he sent by Kale, or was he hunting them both? The questions circled in his mind, a flock of hungry vultures. The work cycle ended. Elian logged out of his terminal, his progress minimal, his focus shattered. He moved with the river of workers leaving the ministry, his shoulders hunched, his eyes scanning the plaza. The man was gone. The space where he had stood was empty, just cold marble and indifferent architecture. The relief was so profound it made him dizzy. Perhaps it was over. Perhaps he had imagined the connection, the intensity of the man's gaze. Perhaps it was all just a manifestation of his own paranoia. He held on to that fragile hope all the way back to his apartment block. But as the maglev door hissed open at his designated stop, he saw him. The alpha was standing at the far end of the platform, looking at a public information screen. He did not turn. He did not acknowledge Elian's presence. But he was there, waiting. The hope crumbled into dust. This was not random. This was a message. Elian's steps were stiff, robotic, as he walked towards the exit, his path forcing him to pass the man. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, his senses screaming. The air grew thick, charged with the alpha's presence. As he drew level, he caught the man's scent. It was not the same as Kale's. Kale's was wild, elemental, rain, and cedar. This alpha's scent was colder, more refined, but with a similar bass note. It was like petrified wood, ancient and unyielding, with an undertone of winter frost. A scent of absolute, chilling authority. He was almost past him when the man spoke. His voice was a low, quiet baritone, devoid of inflection, yet it cut through the station's ambient hum like a razor. Archivist 7 Delta. Elian froze, his blood turning to ice. The man did not turn his head. He continued to stare at the screen. You dropped this. Slowly, the alpha extended a hand. In his gloved palm, lay a small silver data chip. Elian's data chip, the one containing his personal identification and residential access key. He hadn't even realized it was missing. His hand trembled as he reached out and took it. His fingers brushed against the cool leather of the glove. The contact was brief, impersonal, but it sent a jolt through his system. "Be more careful," the Alpha said, his voice still flat, still quiet. "Some things, once lost, cannot be recovered." Then he retracted his hand, turned, and walked away, disappearing into the entrance of a private transit tube reserved for the city's elite. Elian was left standing alone on the platform, the data chip cold and heavy in his palm. It was a threat and a warning, delivered with the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He knew where Elian lived. He knew where he worked. He knew his designation. And he had just demonstrated, with terrifying ease, that he could get close enough to take something from him without Elian even noticing. The fortress was not just breached, it was indefensible. The data chip felt like a brand in his palm. He stood on the empty platform long after the Alpha had gone, the rhythmic hum of the station a counterpoint to the chaotic thrum of his own pulse. Some things, once lost, cannot be recovered. The words were a perfect, cruel echo of the choice he had made that night, to lose himself just for a few hours in something forbidden and real. Now the consequence had a name he didn't know and a face he couldn't forget. Back in his apartment, the silence was no longer a comfort. It was a listening void, an expectant space. He checked the door's security log. No unauthorized access attempts. He swept the room for surveillance devices, a paranoid, futile exercise he hadn't performed since his academy days, when instructors warned of the system's omnipresent gaze. He found nothing, but the feeling of being watched remained, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. The Alpha didn't need a device. His presence lingered, a subtle shift in the room's pressure, the ghost of a scent, petrified wood and frost, that his mind may have invented. He sat at his small utility table, the data chip resting in front of him. He should have been grateful. The Alpha had returned something vital. Losing a personal data chip was a bureaucratic nightmare, a black mark on an Omega's record that suggested carelessness, instability. But it wasn't a kindness. It was a demonstration of power. I can touch you whenever I want. I can take from you whatever I want. And you won't even know it's happening. Elian's hands clenched into fists. For months he had been a ghost, moving through the city unseen, unremarkable. He had cultivated invisibility as a shield. Now that shield was gone. He was seen. He was known. And he was terrified. The fear, however, was mingled with something else, something sharp and unfamiliar. Anger. A cold, quiet rage began to smolder beneath the surface of his panic. He was tired of being afraid. He was tired of living his life as a redaction, a line of text blacked out by the system's heavy hand. Kale had told him to forget. This new Alpha was forcing him to remember. Fine. If he was to be haunted, he would at least learn the name of his ghost. The Central Archive was a repository of all knowledge, but its layers were like the city itself, tiered, restricted, with the most sensitive information buried in the deepest, most inaccessible levels. Alien's clearance was Tier 3. It gave him access to sanitized public histories and departmental records, the information he needed, the identities and lineages of high-tier alphas, was locked away in the Tier 1 societal registry, a vault of data so secure that even accessing its index was a flaggable offense. But Kale had shown him a back door. That night, searching for his forbidden poetry, Kale had navigated the archive's hidden pathways with a familiarity that had stunned Elian. He had called them system flaws, but Elian knew they were intentionally built loopholes for the elite, ways for them to move unseen through the very systems they had created to monitor everyone else. Elian had watched. He had learned. He sat at his terminal the next cycle, his hands poised over the console. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. This was an act of systemic non-compliance. This was career suicide. If he was caught, he would be reassigned to a reclamation facility, his identity scrubbed, his life effectively over. He took a deep, steadying breath. The image of the Alpha's glacial blue eyes flashed in his mind. The memory of his quiet, threatening voice. The alternative, living under that silent, unknown pressure, waiting for the next encounter, the next demonstration of his own powerlessness, was worse. He began to type. He bypassed the standard user interface, accessing the archive's root command line. He entered the coded sequence Kale had used, a complex string of alphanumeric characters that felt alien and dangerous under his fingertips. For a moment, nothing happened. The screen held the blinking cursor, a silent accusation. He thought he had failed. Then a new window bloomed on the screen, stark and unadorned. Registry access, Tier 1, enter biometric query. He didn't have a name. He didn't have a designation. He had a face, a scent, a familial resemblance to Kale. He started there. He pulled up Kale's file using the designation he had memorized that night. The system responded instantly. Kalen var Valerius. Designation, Alpha Tier 1. Lineage, House Valerius. Current assignment, Commander, Aegis Corps, Sector Gamma. The name Valerius hit him like a physical blow. House Valerius was one of the founding families, their lineage, tracing back to the unification itself. They were practically royalty, architects of the current social order. Kale wasn't just a high-ranking alpha. He was heir to a dynasty. The chasm between them was not a gap. It was a universe. The file contained a public-facing portrait. It was Kale, but not the man Elian remembered. This Kale was in a pristine dress uniform, his expression severe, his storm-grey eyes looking past the camera with a cold, detached focus. There was none of the desperate vulnerability, the raw emotion Elian had seen in the dusty archive room. It was the face of the system. Elian's stomach twisted. Had he imagined it all? The connection? The tenderness? Had he just been a tool, an Omega with the right clearance, easily seduced and easily dismissed? He pushed the thought away. He had to focus. The file listed Kale's immediate family. A father, Lord Alaric var Valerius, current head of the house. A mother, Lady Alara. And a brother, Rhys var Valerius. Designation, Alpha, Tier 1. Lineage, House Valerius. Current assignment, First Enforcer, Ministry of Internal Security. A second portrait appeared on the screen. It was him, the man from the corridor, from the plaza. The same hard, aristocratic features, the same straight nose and severe jaw. But the eyes were the most chilling confirmation. Pale, glacial blue, the eyes of a hunter. Rhys var Valerius, First Enforcer. His job was to police the system, to root out dissent, to neutralize threats. He was the system's immune response, its most ruthless and efficient weapon. And he was Kale's older brother. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Rhys wasn't just a random threat. He was investigating. He must have discovered Kale's unauthorized access to the archive. He must have traced it back to Elian. The encounters, the silent observation, the returned data chip. It was all part of an assessment. A predator circling its prey, testing its defenses, deciding its fate. Kyle's warning, "Forget me, for your own safety," was not a rejection. It was the desperate plea of a man who knew what his family, what his brother, was capable of. Kale was trying to protect him from Reese. A wave of cold dread washed over Elian, so intense it left him breathless. He was caught in the gears of a powerful family's internal politics. He was a loose end, a liability, an Omega archivist who knew too much, who had touched something precious and been told to disappear. And the man tasked with making things disappear was now watching his every move. He quickly closed the files, erasing his access log with a trembling hand, using a counter protocol Kyle had taught him. He leaned back in his chair, the chill of the archive seeping into his bones. He had a name for his ghost now, Reese, and the knowledge was not a comfort. It was a death sentence. He had two choices: run and be hunted by the most powerful enforcer in the city, or stay and wait for the axe to fall. Both paths led to the same dark, silent place. For the first time, a third option began to flicker in the back of his mind, a tiny, dangerous spark of defiance. What if he didn't run? What if he didn't wait? What if he did the one thing they would never expect a Tier 3 Omega to do? What if he fought back? The spark of defiance was a fragile thing, easily extinguished by the crushing weight of reality. How could an archivist fight an enforcer? With redacted poetry, with knowledge of hidden data streams, his arsenal was pathetic against the state-sanctioned power Reese wielded. For days, Elian existed in a state of heightened, nerve-shredding alertness. Every shadow in a corridor, every silent footstep behind him on the concourse, every unexpected chime of his apartment's comms unit sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through him. He saw Reese everywhere and nowhere. He would catch a glimpse of a dark coat in a crowd, and his blood would run cold, only for the person to turn and reveal a stranger's face. The psychological pressure was immense, a deliberate, calculated campaign to unnerve him. Reese was not just watching him, he was dismantling him, piece by piece, from the inside out. Elian's work suffered. He made errors, transposing data, missing redaction flags. His supervisor, a bland, officious beta named Lorik, noted his distraction with a disapproving frown. "Your focus metrics are down 7 delta, Lorik had said, his voice flat and accusing. Personal matters should not interfere with systemic duties. Elian had simply nodded, murmuring an apology. How could he explain that the personal matter was the chilling certainty that the system's top enforcer was stalking him? He was becoming a liability at work, a ghost in his own life, haunted by a future that felt terrifyingly imminent. He had to do something. The passivity was eating him alive. He decided to change his routine, a small act of rebellion, a test. Instead of taking the direct maglev route home, he disembarked 2 stops early and walked through the Tier 2 commercial sector. It was a world of polished chrome, holographic advertisements, and citizens with smoother, more expensive-looking grey uniforms. The air smelled faintly of artificial floral scents pumped through the ventilation system, a luxury his own tier lacked. He moved through the unfamiliar streets, feeling exposed, out of place. He was looking for a sign, a confirmation of his fears. He found it in the reflection of a shop window displaying luxury protein synthesizers. Reese was there, standing across the street, partially obscured by a support column. He was not looking at a lion, but at a public news ticker scrolling across a building. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his stillness was a vortex, pulling all the energy of the street towards it. He knew Elian was there. He knew Elian was watching him. Elian's breath caught in his throat. He turned away from the window and forced himself to walk, to continue his path as if he had seen nothing. He turned a corner, his heart pounding. He was not imagining it. This was real. This was happening. He ducked into a small alcove, the entrance to a drab residential block, and pressed his back against the cold wall, trying to control his breathing. What did Reese want? If he meant to arrest him, to neutralize him, why the games? Why the slow, deliberate torment? A sleek, black official vehicle, the kind used by ministry enforcers, slid to a silent stop at the curb just a few meters away. The rear door hissed open. Reese appeared, stepping out from behind the column he had been standing near. He moved with an unhurried, predatory grace. He did not look at the alcove where Elian was hiding. He walked directly to the open door of the vehicle. Before getting in, he paused. He turned his head and looked straight at Elian. His glacial blue eyes were unreadable, but the message was crystal clear. I see you. There is nowhere you can hide. He held Elian's gaze for a long, terrifying moment. Then he got into the vehicle, and it slid away into the traffic, as silent as it had arrived. Elian leaned against the wall, his legs trembling so badly he thought he might collapse. The casual, almost theatrical nature of the display was what terrified him most. This was a game to Reese, a hunt. And Elian was the prey. He finally made it back to his apartment, the fortress that no longer felt safe. He initiated a full security lockdown, a feature he had never used, and the plasteel shutters slid down over his window, plunging the room into darkness. He sank onto his bed, the silence and the dark pressing in on him. He felt stripped bare, exposed, his life no longer his own. And in that darkness, the memory of that night with Kale returned, not as a source of fear, but as the only warmth he had ever known. He remembered the desperate hunger in Kale's touch, a hunger that had mirrored his own. It hadn't been just the primal call of Alpha to Omega. It had been more, a meeting of two solitudes, two people suffocating under the weight of the roles they were forced to play. Kale, the perfect heir, suffocated by duty. Elian, the compliant Omega, suffocated by conformity. For a few hours, in that dusty room, they had both been free. "What are you looking for?" Elian had asked, his voice barely a whisper. They were surrounded by the ghosts of a forgotten world, by art that screamed with an emotion their own world had outlawed. Kale had looked up from a fragile, digitized manuscript, his eyes dark with a longing that stole Elian's breath. "Proof," Kyle had said, his voice low and rough. "Proof that this regulated, sterile existence isn't the only way. That there was something more, something worth fighting for." He had reached out then, his fingers brushing against Elian's cheek, a touch that was both hesitant and possessive. Kale's scent had intensified, filling the small space, and Elian had felt his own, answering scent rise to meet it, a sweet floral note of surrender and invitation that his suppressants should have muted. He had leaned into the touch, a lifetime of repression crumbling in that single moment. "And did you find it?" Elian had whispered. Kale's stormy gaze had held his. "I think I just did." The memory was so clear, so potent, it was a physical ache in his chest. That was what Reese was trying to destroy. Not just a secret, but the memory of a connection that defied the system. That was what they were afraid of. Not the breach of protocol, but the proof that their perfect, ordered world was a lie. The spark of defiance, which had been nearly smothered by fear, rekindled. It burned brighter this time, fed by the memory of Kale's desperate search for meaning. Reese thought he was hunting a frightened Omega. He was about to discover he was hunting a man with nothing left to lose. Elian rose from the bed and reactivated his terminal. He was done hiding. He was done waiting. He would not be a pawn in the Valerius family's game. He would become a player. He began to search, not for information on Reese or Kale, but for the file they had been looking at that night, the collection of redacted poetry. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew it was the key. It was the source of Kale's hope and Reese's fear. He would find it, and he would use it. The hunt, he decided, with a surge of cold resolve, was about to be reversed. The search was an obsession. Elian spent every spare moment, every stolen minute at his terminal, navigating the archive's hidden pathways. He slept in short, dreamless bursts, fueled by nutrient paste and a simmering, defiant energy. He was looking for a ghost file, a piece of data that Kyle had found and that the system had tried to bury. He worked backwards, tracing the faint digital footprints Kyle had left that night. It was like following a trail of breadcrumbs through a labyrinth designed to make you forget where you'd been. The system fought him at every turn, throwing up firewalls and false data trails. But Elian's mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, to find order in the forgotten and discarded, was uniquely suited to the task. He was an archivist. This was his territory. He felt Reese's presence constantly, a cold weight on his consciousness. He would see the black vehicle parked a block from his apartment in the simulated dawn, or catch a glimpse of the severe, dark coat across a crowded plaza. Reese was no longer hiding his surveillance. It was a constant, silent pressure, a reminder of the power he held. But the fear was changing. It was transmuting into fuel. Each sighting, each silent threat, only hardened Elian's resolve. Let him watch. Let him see an Omega who refused to break. After 3 cycles of relentless searching, he found it. It was not in the poetry archive. It was buried deeper, mislabeled and cross-referenced under a clinical, unassuming title: Pre-Unification Agricultural Logistics, Sector Epsilon. It was a deliberate act of camouflage. Inside the mundane file was a single, encrypted subfolder. Elian used the decryption key he'd seen Kyle use, a line from one of the forbidden poems, where stone gives way to sky. The file opened. It was not poetry. It was a private journal. The entries were dated over 2 centuries ago, during the chaotic final years before the unification and the rise of the founding families. The author was an Omega named Lyra. Her writing was raw, passionate, full of the emotive language Elian spent his days redacting. She wrote of a world without tears, without designations, enforced by the state. She wrote of love, of choosing a mate not by biocompatibility scores, but by a connection of the soul. And she wrote of her alpha, an alpha who dreamed of a world governed by consent, not control. An alpha who was leading a rebellion against the very ideologues who would go on to become the founders. An alpha named Valerius. Elian stared at the name. It couldn't be. He scrolled through the journal, his hands shaking. Lyra wrote of her Alpha's brother, a pragmatist, a warrior who believed his brother's idealism was a weakness that would lead them all to ruin. The two brothers, united in their fight against the old regime, were fractured by their vision for the future, the idealist and the enforcer. The final entry was frantic, written in haste. Lyra was pregnant. Their enemies were closing in. Her Alpha was going to a parley, a supposed peace talk brokered by his own brother. She was afraid. It was a trap. He trusts his blood, she wrote, the words a digital scream across the centuries. But I see the ice in his brother's eyes. It is the cold of ambition, not loyalty. He would sacrifice his own to build his perfect world. May the sky forgive him. I never will. The journal ended there. There were no more entries. Elian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the archive's temperature. He cross-referenced the names, the dates. The historical records were heavily sanitized, but the truth was there, hidden between the lines. The rebellion had failed. The idealist Alpha, the first Valerius, had been martyred, his death used to rally support for his brother's more stable and authoritarian vision of the New World Order. The brother, the one with the ice in his eyes, had become the first founder of House Valerius. The official history called him a hero. Lyra's journal called him a traitor. This was the secret of House Valerius. Their entire legacy, their founding myth, was built on a lie, on the murder of a brother by a brother. Kyle, the sensitive, questioning heir, had found this. He had found the ghost of his ancestor, the idealist, and seen his own reflection. And Rhys, the first enforcer, the pragmatist with ice in his eyes, was a perfect echo of the first Valerius, the one who had sacrificed his own blood for the sake of order. This wasn't just about a secret affair between a high-tier Alpha and a low-tier Omega. This was about the soul of a dynasty. Kyle was a threat to their legacy, not because he broke the rules, but because he embodied the ancestor they had tried to erase. Elian was a threat because he was the catalyst, the Omega who had awakened that dangerous idealism in Kale. Now he understood. Rhys wasn't just trying to intimidate him. He was trying to understand him, to see if he was a simple distraction for his brother or something more, to see if he carried the same spark of rebellion as the long-dead Omega, Lyra. The console in front of him chimed, signaling an incoming priority communication. It was from a source outside the archive's internal network, a breach of protocol so severe that alarms should have been blaring. But they were silent. The message was just one line of unadorned text. The cafe at Meridian Spire. 1 hour. There was no signature, but Elian knew. It was Rhys. The game was over. The assessment was complete. Now came the verdict. Elian's first instinct was to run, to copy the journal file onto a data chip and disappear into the underbelly of the city. But where could he go that the first enforcer couldn't find him? Lyra's words echoed in his mind. He trusts his blood. Kale had trusted Elian that night, trusted him with his search, with his vulnerability. He had passed a torch, whether he intended to or not. To run now would be to let that flame die. He sent a one-word reply, confirmed. Then, with a steady hand, he copied Lyra's journal, not onto a portable chip, but into a secure, time-locked data worm he had designed himself. He programmed it to release the file to the public data streams in 24 hours, his only insurance policy. He could disarm it, but only from his personal terminal. If he disappeared, if he was taken, the truth of House Valerius would be broadcast to the entire city. It was a desperate, suicidal move. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than fear. He felt a sliver of power. He logged out of his station, stood up, and walked out of the archive to meet his fate. He was no longer just Archivist 7 Delta. He was the keeper of a truth that could burn their perfect world to the ground. The cafe at Meridian Spire was a place of quiet, sterile luxury. It occupied the 100th floor of the Ministry of Internal Security's headquarters, a glass-walled circle that offered a panoramic, godlike view of the domed city below. It was a place for the powerful, for the architects of the system to look down upon their creation. Elian felt the pressure of 1,000 unseen eyes as he was escorted from the lobby by 2 silent, grey-uniformed guards. He was an anomaly here, a Tier 3 Omega in a Tier 1 space. His simple uniform was a mark of otherness, a stain on the pristine environment. Reese was waiting at a small, isolated table by the window. He was out of his severe coat, dressed in a simple, dark tunic that fit his powerful frame perfectly. He looked less like an enforcer and more like the aristocrat he was. He rose as Elian approached, a gesture of formal, archaic courtesy that was more unnerving than any threat. "Archivist," he said, his voice the same low, inflectionless baritone. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming." Elian sat. The chair was surprisingly comfortable. On the table were 2 cups of a dark, aromatic beverage he recognized from historical files as coffee, a rare, expensive import from the off-world colonies. The scent was rich and bitter. "I'm not here by choice," Elian said, his voice tight. He was proud that it didn't tremble. Reese gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. It did not reach his pale, glacial eyes. "Choice is a luxury, Archivist, a commodity we trade for security. You, of all people, should know that." He pushed one of the cups towards Elian. "Drink. It will help with the nerves." "I am not nervous," Elian lied. Reese's gaze was analytical, dissecting. "Your heart rate is elevated. Your pheromonal output, though suppressed, indicates acute anxiety. You are an exceptionally poor liar. It's one of the things my brother found so refreshing about you." The mention of Kale was a deliberate probe. Elian did not react. He looked out the window at the city, a sprawling, glittering circuit board of light and order. "What do you want, Enforcer?" "I want to understand the nature of the threat you represent," Reese said calmly, taking a sip of his coffee. "For weeks I have observed you. You are disciplined, intelligent, highly resilient. You do not panic. You investigate. You adapt. You are, for a Tier 3 Omega, a remarkable specimen." The clinical assessment made Elian's skin crawl. "I am not a specimen." "No," Reese conceded, his eyes holding Elian's. "You are a catalyst. My brother has always been impressionable. He carries a strain of romantic idealism that our grandfather, thankfully, bred out of the main Valerius line. Kyle sees the world in terms of poetry. I see it in terms of structure. He believes the system is a cage. I know it is an ark, protecting us from the chaos that lies outside." "The chaos you created," Elian said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Reese's expression did not change, but a new stillness, a dangerous intensity, entered his eyes. "You found the journal." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Elian's silence was his confirmation. "I see," Reese said softly. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "So you know our family's foundational secret. You believe, like my brother, that our ancestor was a martyr and yours was a hero. History is a matter of perspective, archivist. One man's idealist is another's incompetent leader. One man's pragmatist is another's tyrant. Our ancestor made a difficult choice. He chose order over sentiment. He built this world, a world that, for all its flaws, works. It is stable. It is safe. It is a lie, Elian said, his voice low and firm. And Kyle knows it. Kyle is a fool, Reese said, the first flicker of genuine emotion, a cold, sharp anger, coloring his voice. He would burn everything to the ground in pursuit of a ghost you helped him find. He has become a security risk, and you, archivist, are the detonator. He leaned forward, the full force of his alpha presence washing over Elian, a wave of pure, chilling dominance. It was not aggressive, not overtly threatening, but it was absolute. It was the pressure of a deep ocean designed to crush. I have two options, Reese continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I can eliminate you. It would be clean, efficient. A tragic accident at your residential block, a data stream feedback loop at your terminal. No one would question it. My brother would grieve, he would rage, but eventually he would fall back in line. The risk would be neutralized. Elian's blood ran cold, but he held the alpha's gaze. He did not look away. He would not give him the satisfaction of seeing his fear. And the second option? He asked, his throat dry. Reese studied him for a long moment. The second option is more complicated. It requires me to believe that you are more than just a catalyst. That you are, in fact, the key. The key to what? My brother's survival, Reese said. The words were so unexpected that Elian could only stare. He will not let this go, Reese explained, his voice losing its hard edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like weariness. He will not forget you. He will continue to dig into the past. He will become more reckless. He will expose himself and our family to our enemies. Our father is not a sentimental man. If he perceives Kale as a threat to the Valerius legacy, he will remove him permanently. He has done it before. The implication was monstrous. Lord Valerius would kill his own son to protect a lie. The family resemblance, Elian realized, was not just physical. The ice in Reese's eyes was inherited. So I am offering you a third choice, archivist, beyond running or fighting, a choice to be a part of the solution. What solution? Elian asked, his mind reeling. You will be bound to my brother, Reese stated, as if discussing a political treaty. A sanctioned, official pairing. It is irregular, of course. The tier difference is unprecedented. But I have the influence to make it happen. You will be elevated, brought into our house. You will be Kyle's anchor. Your presence will satisfy his romantic delusions, and your new position will ensure your silence. You will be his beautiful, gilded cage. Elian stared at him, speechless. This was the solution. To be a prisoner, a tool to control Kale, to live a lie at the heart of the biggest lie of all. You would do that? Elian finally managed to say. Give your idealistic brother the Omega he desires, just to keep him quiet? I would do whatever is necessary to protect my family and preserve the stability of this city, Reese said, his voice flat and absolute. I am not my ancestor, archivist. I will not kill my brother, but I will cage him, if I must, to save him from himself, and you will be the lock on the door. He stood up, the audience over. You have 24 hours to decide. If you agree, meet me here at the same time tomorrow. If you do not, I would advise you to be very careful on your way home. He turned and walked away, leaving Elian alone at the table, the untouched cup of coffee growing cold. The panoramic view of the city suddenly felt like the bars of a vast, inescapable prison. Rhys had offered him a cage, but he had also, inadvertently, given him a weapon. He had confirmed that Kyle's life was in danger, and he had revealed that Elian himself was valuable. He was not just a liability, he was leverage. The data worm was still set to release Lyra's journal, 23 hours and counting. The choice was not just about his own survival anymore. It was about Kale's, and it was about the truth. The walk back to his residential block was a blur. The city's sterile beauty, its perfect lines and controlled ambient sounds, seemed like a mockery. Elian saw the cracks in its facade, the rot of the lie it was built upon. Rhys's offer echoed in his mind, a seductive, poisonous whisper. Safety, proximity to Kale, a life of comfort and privilege. All he had to do was surrender his will, his truth, and become a part of the lie. He would be a pampered pet, a beautiful object in a gilded cage, his only purpose to keep the Valerius heir docile and compliant. The thought filled him with a revulsion so profound it was nauseating. He had spent his entire life being compliant, being invisible. The last few weeks, under the terrifying pressure of Rhys's scrutiny, he had started to become someone else, someone who fought back. To accept Rhys's offer would be to kill that nascent person, to willingly crawl back into a prison far more suffocating than his small, grey apartment. When he reached his door, he knew his answer. But knowing it and acting on it were two different things. His hand trembled as he keyed in the access code. He had less than a day to formulate a plan, a counter-offer to the most powerful man in the city. A plan that wouldn't get both him and Kale killed. The moment he stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. The air was different. The sterile, recycled scent of his apartment was gone, replaced by something warm, organic, and overwhelmingly familiar. Scorched cedar and rain. Kale was there. He was sitting in the single chair at the small utility table, his frame too large for the modest furniture. He wore a simple black uniform, devoid of rank or insignia, but it couldn't hide the coiled tension in his shoulders. His head was in his hands, and when he looked up, his storm-grey eyes were filled with a desperate, hunted look that mirrored how Elian had felt for weeks. "Elian," he breathed, his voice rough. "What have you done?" Elian's heart constricted. He closed the door behind him, the click of the lock sounding unnaturally loud. "What are you doing here? It's not safe." "Safe?" Kale gave a bitter, humorless laugh. He stood up, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. "Nowhere is safe. I felt it the moment you accessed the registry. A Tier 1 flag, bypassed by my own access codes. I knew it was you. I tried to cover your tracks, but he was already watching you by then. My brother. He sees everything." He stopped in front of Elian, his presence filling the tiny apartment, his scent a dizzying, intoxicating cloud. "I came as soon as I could slip my security detail. I had to warn you. Elian, you have to disappear. I can get you out of the city, give you a new identity. You have to go, now." "He knows, Kale," Elian said quietly. "He knows everything. About the journal. About us." Kale's face went pale. "He told you. We just met. He offered me a deal." Kale's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What deal?" "To become your gilded cage," Elian said, his voice flat. "A sanctioned pairing. He wants to use me to control you." A raw, agonized sound escaped Kale's throat. He turned away, slamming his fist against the wall. The impact shuddered through the room. "That bastard!" he snarled. He would do that. He would turn something. He would turn you into another one of his tools of control. He turned back to Elian, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective anger. You can't accept. You can't. It's a trap. You would be a prisoner. I know, Elian said. I have no intention of accepting. Relief washed over Kyle's face, quickly followed by renewed fear. Then you have to run. Now. Before he decides you're no longer useful leverage. He will kill you, Elian. Without a moment's hesitation. He thinks it's his duty. And what about you, Kyle? Elian asked, taking a step closer. What happens to you if I run? Rhys made it very clear that our father sees you as a threat, that he would remove you. The protective fire in Kyle's eyes faltered, replaced by a deep, weary pain. That's my burden to bear. Not yours. This is my fight. I dragged you into it, and I will get you out. No, Elian said, his voice ringing with a newfound strength that surprised them both. You didn't drag me into anything. You woke me up. That night in the archive, you were looking for proof that there was something more. You found it. We found it. I'm not going to let you face them alone. Kyle stared at him, his expression a mixture of awe and terror. Elian, you don't understand what you're saying. They will destroy you. Let them try, Elian said. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently touched Kyle's arm. The contact was electric, a current of warmth and recognition passing between them. I have a plan, but I need to know if you trust me. Kyle looked down at Elian's hand on his arm, then back up to his face. The desperation in his eyes was still there, but it was now mingled with a fragile, dawning hope. He had spent his life surrounded by liars and manipulators, by people who saw him as an heir, a symbol, a tool. Elian saw him as a person. I trust you, Kyle said, his voice thick with emotion. He covered Elian's hand with his own, his grip warm and firm. More than I trust my own blood. Good, Elian said, his own resolve solidifying into something unbreakable. Because we are not going to run. We are not going to hide. We are going to change the terms of the deal. He explained his plan quickly, concisely. The data worm, the 24-hour deadline, his idea for a counter-proposal to Rhys. As he spoke, he saw the calculation return to Kyle's eyes, the mind of a military commander assessing a battlefield. It's a massive risk, Kyle said, when he had finished. If Rhys calls your bluff, the journal is released, and our father will burn the city down to contain the fallout. We'll be the first to burn. He won't, Elian said, with a certainty he didn't entirely feel. Rhys doesn't want chaos. He wants control. I'm going to offer him a different kind of control, one that saves you, protects the family secret, and gives me what I want. And what do you want, Elian? Kyle asked, his voice soft, his thumb stroking the back of Elian's hand. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with all the things they had never said. Elian looked into his stormy grey eyes. Freedom, he said simply. For both of us. The moment was broken by the chime of the apartment's comms unit, a priority 1 signal. It was Rhys. Elian moved to the panel, Kyle, a tense shadow behind him. He activated the audio channel. I trust you've had time to consider my offer, Archivist, Rhys's cold voice said. Elian took a breath. Your offer is rejected, Enforcer. There was a pause. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, dangerous. A foolish decision, Rhys said, his voice losing all traces of civility. It will have consequences. I have a counter-offer, Elian said, cutting him off. Meet me. 1 hour. The place where it began, The lower-level archive room. Come alone, or in 22 hours, the entire city will know the truth about the first Valerius. He cut the connection before Rhys could respond. He turned to face Kyle, his heart hammering. He had just declared war. He'll come, Kyle said, a grim certainty in his voice. But he won't come alone. I know, Alien said, and we'll be ready. For the first time, in the cramped, sterile apartment, surrounded by danger, they were not Alpha and Omega, not Tier 1 and Tier 3. They were partners, and they were ready to fight for a future their world insisted they could never have. The lower-level archive room was exactly as he remembered it, cold, silent, and smelling of dust and decaying data. The ghosts of the past felt tangible here, their whispers encoded in the silent crystals lining the walls. Elian stood in the center of the room, the same spot where he had first felt the pull of Kyle's gravity, where the system's careful conditioning had first cracked. He was alone. Kyle was hidden, tucked away in a recessed maintenance alcove behind a bank of servers, a silent, unseen presence. It was Elian's negotiation, his terms. Kyle was there only as a last resort, an insurance policy against Rhys's treachery. The heavy mag-sealed door hissed open precisely on the hour. Rhys stepped inside, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. He was back in his severe, dark coat, the uniform of his authority. As Kyle had predicted, he was not alone. 2 enforcers, clad in matte black tactical gear, their faces obscured by reflective visors, flanked him. They moved with a lethal, synchronized efficiency, taking up positions on either side of the door. "This is not what we agreed, Archivist," Rhys said, his voice dangerously calm. His pale eyes scanned the room, missing nothing. "You test my patience. You test my trust," Elian countered, his voice steady. He would not show fear. He was no longer the frightened Omega from the corridor. "Your men can wait outside. This is between you and me." Rhys considered him for a long moment, his gaze sharp and penetrating, as if trying to read the code of Elian's soul. Then, with a curt nod, he gestured to his men. They retreated back into the corridor, and the door hissed shut, leaving the 3 of them, one visible, one hidden, in the charged silence. "You have my attention, Archivist," Rhys said, taking a step further into the room. "You have made a very bold, very foolish move, threatening my family. You seem to have mistaken my previous offer for a sign of weakness. Allow me to correct that misapprehension. I can take that data worm from your network. I can scrub every trace of that journal from every system in this city, and I can erase you so completely that no one will even remember your designation. Tell me why I shouldn't do that right now." Elian met his chilling gaze without flinching. "Because you can't be sure you'll find every copy. Because you don't know who else I've sent it to. Because releasing the journal was never my primary goal. It's just my leverage." "Leverage for what?" Rhys asked, his voice laced with contempt. "A better cage? More luxurious terms of surrender?" "For a new contract," Elian said. "One that benefits all of us." He began to lay out his terms, his voice clear and precise, the voice of an archivist presenting his findings. He did not plead. He did not threaten. He stated facts. "Term 1, he began. "Kale will be granted a special dispensation to pursue his historical research projects. He will be given command of a deep space exploration vessel, a 5-year mission to chart the unknown regions. It will remove him from the city, from our father's direct scrutiny, and from the political machinations of your rivals. It will give him a purpose that satisfies his idealism without threatening your stability. You will frame it as a prestigious, vital mission for the security of the dome, a hero's journey. Reese's expression remained impassive, but Elian could see a flicker of calculation in his eyes. He was listening. Term 2, Elian continued. I will go with him, not as his sanctioned mate, not as a prisoner of House Valerius, but as the mission's chief archivist and xenolinguist. My tier will be elevated to a level commensurate with the posting. My identity will be my own. We will be partners, colleagues. Our personal relationship will be our own business, beyond the reach of your father and the system's protocols. You want me to grant my brother his escape, with you at his side, Reese said, a thread of disbelief in his voice. You want me to reward his rebellion. You want to save his life, Elian corrected him. You want to remove a political liability and secure your own position as the undisputed heir to Lord Valerius. With Kale gone, your path is clear. His mission will bring honor to the family name, and his research will be safely conducted light years from anyone who matters. You get what you want, Enforcer. Control, stability. Kale gets what he wants, purpose, freedom. And I get what I want. Which is, Reese pressed, his gaze unwavering. The right to choose, Elian said softly. The right to exist outside the box you put me in. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken history, with the ghosts of two brothers from centuries past. Reese was the pragmatist. He was the architect of order. Elian had not appealed to his heart. He had appealed to his logic. He had presented a solution that was cold, clean, and brutally efficient. It was a deal the first Valerius enforcer would have made. And the journal, Reese finally asked. The data worm is my life insurance, Elian said. It is keyed to my biometric signature. As long as I'm alive and free, it remains dormant. If anything happens to me, or to Kale, if you go back on our agreement in any way, it activates. The journal is released. Your family's legacy is shattered. It is the principle of mutually assured destruction, the only language a man like you truly understands. For the first time, Reese looked at him with something other than cold analysis or contempt. It was a flicker of something that might have been respect. You have learned a great deal, Archivist. You were an excellent teacher, Elian replied. The door to the maintenance alcove slid open. Kyle stepped out. He moved to stand beside Elian, not in front of him, not as a protector, but as an equal. His presence was a silent, solid affirmation of the terms. Reese's gaze shifted to his brother. The air crackled with the tension between them. A lifetime of rivalry, resentment, and a twisted, buried affection. You would abandon your birthright for this, Reese asked Kale, his voice low. For a half-baked dream and a Tier 3 Omega. I would abandon a lie to find a truth, Kale answered, his voice firm. He looked at Elian, and the warmth in his gaze was a stark contrast to his brother's icy stare. And he is more than you will ever be capable of seeing. Reese held their combined gaze for a long time. The fate of 3 lives and the secret of a dynasty hung in the balance, in the cold, silent archive room. Elian did not breathe. Finally, Reese gave a single, sharp nod. The arrangement is acceptable, he said, the words clipped, precise. I will make the necessary preparations. The vessel, the Stellara, will be ready for launch in 1 month. Your new designations and assignments will be processed. Until then, you will both be under my personal security detail. Do not mistake it for anything other than house arrest. He turned to leave. then paused at the door. He looked back, not at Kale, but at Elian. "A word of advice, archivist," he said, his voice cold. "Space is a vast, empty, chaotic place. Be careful you do not get lost in it. The Ark, for all its flaws, offers shelter from the storm." The door hissed shut, leaving them alone. Elian finally let out the breath he had been holding. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and he swayed. Kyle's arm was instantly around him, steadying him. "You did it," Kyle whispered, his voice full of wonder. "Elian, you actually did it." Elian leaned against him, the solid warmth of his body a welcome anchor. He could feel the frantic, relieved beat of Kale's heart against his back. "We did it," Elian corrected him. He was trembling, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally receding, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its wake. But beneath the exhaustion was a profound, exhilarating sense of peace. He had faced the monster in the dark, and he had not been devoured. He had stared into the heart of the system and had forced it to bend. He turned in Kale's arms, facing him. Kale's hands came up to cup his face, his thumbs gently stroking his cheeks. The storm-grey eyes were soft, filled with an emotion so deep, so unguarded, it made Elian's chest ache. "He told me to forget you," Elian whispered, the memory of that first, brutal command surfacing. "I'm glad I'm not very good at following orders," Kale murmured, his voice thick. He leaned down, and his lips met Elian's. The kiss was not like the desperate, feverish connection they had shared that first night. This was slow, tender, a promise. It was the taste of cedar and rain, of starlight and impossible futures. It was the taste of freedom. They were not free yet. They were still in the cage, but for the first time they could see the sky, and they had the key.